Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking a really hard, completely unfiltered look at the European Accessibility Act today, or the EAA as it's known.
Right.
And we're going to see what it really means for e-commerce compliance. We're actually basing our exploration today on a pretty revealing and honestly fairly alarming recent survey report from Accessibility.
Yeah, and we are just so glad you are joining us for this conversation because, whether you're, say, prepping for a high-stakes global strategy meeting right now, or maybe you're actively managing a digital storefront,
Right.
or honestly, even if you're just insanely curious about the sort of invisible infrastructure of international commerce, our mission today is critical.
Yeah.
We really need to understand exactly why digital accessibility has suddenly transitioned from being like a nice-to-have best practice into this totally enforceable global mandate.
Okay, let's unpack this because before we go any further, I really want to establish the timeline here. The timeline completely alters how we need to look at this information.
It really does.
So today is July 2026. And I am stressing the date because, a lot of the corporate chatter you might hear makes it sound like European accessibility mandates are some distant storm gathering on the horizon, like it's a future problem.
Right. Yeah.
They aren't. The European Accessibility Act already came into effect over a year ago, back in June 2025.
Yeah, and that is the pivotal reality check for anyone listening. We are operating in the past tense here.
Exactly.
This is not some pending legislation sitting in a committee somewhere. It's not just a proposed set of voluntary guidelines. It is active, enforceable law governing exactly how digital experiences must be delivered to consumers.
So if this is already active law in Europe, a very valid question arises, right?
Right.
Why should you, listening right now perhaps, sitting in an office in North America, or maybe tuning in from Asia, why should you care about what Brussels is doing?
Yeah, why does it matter to you?
We really need to debunk this persistent myth of geographic immunity.
What's fascinating here is the massive psychological disconnect at play. Because for decades, companies have been conditioned to equate their physical headquarters with their regulatory jurisdiction.
Right, like I'm based here, so I follow these rules.
Exactly. Executives tend to think my corporate office is in Ohio or my main warehouse is in Osaka, therefore European law does not apply to my daily operations. But the EAA completely bypasses that old school brick and mortar logic. It completely ignores modern digital borders.
And that makes total sense when you think about how the internet actually functions. I mean, the EAA does not care where your business is incorporated.
No, not at all.
It doesn't care where your CEO lives, where your taxes are filed, or, where your servers are physically plugged into the wall. The law applies to absolutely anyone selling to or operating a digital service for consumers located in the European Union.
Yeah, if a consumer in the EU can access your site, browse your catalog, and initiate a purchase, you are squarely in the crosshairs of this legislation.
You're in.
You have effectively opened up shop in their jurisdiction, regardless of your physical zip code. And the data from the Accessibility report shows just how wide this net really is. They surveyed major e-commerce leaders, and 71% confirmed that they sell their products and services to the EU.
Wait, 71%?
Yeah.
That's almost 3/4 of the entire sector.
Right, which means the vast majority of the global e-commerce market is legally bound by the European Accessibility Act right now, whether they realize it or not.
Wow.
But here's the data point that should really keep executives up at night. Let's break down the preparedness gap. The survey found that of the companies actively selling to the EU, only 34% say they are actually prepared for this law.
So the result?
Yeah, the other 66% admit they are not fully prepared.
That's a massive liability, 2/3 of the market.
It gets worse, actually. Of that unprepared 66%, a highly concerning 19% haven't even started.
Wait, really? 19%?
19%. They're at square one. They are not prepared at all.
That's just wild.
You have businesses operating in a market where a strict digital standard is actively enforceable, and roughly 1 in 5 of them haven't done any meaningful preparation whatsoever. They're flying completely blind into a regulatory buzzsaw.
I really want to visualize what that kind of corporate negligence looks like because I think we get a bit detached when we talk about digital infrastructure.
We do, yeah. That sounds so technical.
It does. So imagine, if you will, spending millions of dollars to open a state-of-the-art international storefront. Let's say it's a flagship store in the heart of Paris or Berlin.
Okay, setting the scene.
You've perfected the marketing campaigns, the shelves are beautifully stocked, the interior lighting is just flawless. But on opening day, you build a massive staircase at the entrance with no ramp.
Oh, wow.
And inside, you replace all the price tags with blank paper that can only be read if you're wearing like a very specific brand of glasses.
Hmm. It sounds like a completely absurd, almost comical business strategy when you frame it in the physical world. I mean, no rational company would ever intentionally lock out a fifth of their potential buyers or make it impossible for them to know what things cost.
But in the digital world, that is precisely what is happening right now on a massive global scale. You've built the global digital presence, but you've left the digital doors locked for users who rely on screen readers or keyboard navigation or other assistive technologies.
Right. They can see the digital building, but they cannot enter.
Exactly. They cannot browse and they certainly cannot buy.
And unlike a physical store where a locked door just means, lost foot traffic and a missed sale, in this digital scenario, that locked door carries a massive, massive penalty.
Yes, it's not just a missed sale anymore.
Exactly. That transition from a lost commercial opportunity to an active punishable liability is where the conversation completely changes. We are looking at a fundamentally different legal environment now.
Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit scary for those unprepared companies we just talked about. Under the EAA, the penalty for noncompliance isn't some minor slap on the wrist.
Not at all.
We are looking at fines of up to 500,000 euros. And that is not a flat one-time fee. That is up to 500,000 euros per violation.
Per violation. Those are the two most dangerous words in that entire report for an unprepared business.
I want to make sure I'm fully wrapping my head around the scale of this and how it mechanically works. Are we saying that if a company's website is a mess, they don't just get handed a single ticket?
Right.
Like if an e-commerce site has an inaccessible checkout flow and they also have an inaccessible product catalog, and on top of that, their customer account portal is completely broken for assistive tech, could those individual fines theoretically stack on top of each other?
Based on the legal framework, yes. Depending on how enforcement actions ultimately play out, they absolutely can stack. Regulators aren't just looking at a single overarching, your website is bad, fine. They can look at distinct digital products, services, and user flows.
So it's about the specific barriers you've erected.
Right. If your payment gateway actively blocks a user with a motor disability from completing a transaction because they can't use a mouse, that is a violation.
Okay, yeah.
If your customer service chatbot is completely incompatible with a visually impaired user's screen reader, that is another distinct failure in the service delivery.
So a company could legitimately be looking at €500,000 for the broken catalog, another $500,000 for the inaccessible checkout, another $500,000 for the portal. Suddenly you're talking about millions of euros.
Millions, yeah.
And you're talking about an existential threat to a business's bottom line.
And to truly understand the gravity of this shift, we have to contrast it with how global companies, particularly those based in North America, have traditionally viewed accessibility litigation.
Yeah, let's talk about the U.S. comparison.
In the U.S., digital accessibility enforcement has largely been driven by private plaintiff lawsuits, usually under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right, I've seen that in the news. The source notes that those U.S. lawsuits typically result in settlements hovering in the, $5,000 to $25,000 range?
Exactly. Which brings us to a really cynical reality about corporate strategy. For a long time, many companies looked at that $5,000 to $25,000 settlement range and simply categorized it as a mere cost of doing business.
Just a line item on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, it was cheaper in their minds to occasionally pay off a plaintiff or a law firm than it was to fundamentally rebuild their digital infrastructure.
It was treated as a nuisance fee, like getting a parking ticket for leaving your delivery truck in a loading zone for too long. You just, you pay it and move on.
A nuisance fee is the perfect way to describe the old mindset. But the European Accessibility Act entirely obliterates that calculus.
It really does.
It introduces a regulatory penalty structure driven by formal government enforcement, not private plaintiffs looking for a quick settlement.
Yeah.
You cannot settle with a European regulator for 10 grand and make them go away.
Nope.
The risk profile has fundamentally shifted from a manageable legal nuisance to a catastrophic regulatory hammer.
Okay, if I am listening to this right now and I'm sitting in a strategy meeting realizing the company is part of that unprepared majority, I'm probably sweating.
Yeah, you probably should be.
Because €500,000 stackable fines driven by government regulators is a terrifying prospect. So if the stakes are this catastrophic, how is anyone supposed to survive this? How do you even know what the regulator wants you to fix?
Let's pivot to the actual requirements, because the sources do offer a massive silver lining here.
They do, and it is crucial we don't just leave you in a state of panic.
Yeah.
While the stakes have skyrocketed, the actual solution is highly standardized and completely attainable. It's not a mystery. Okay, good. Let's lay out what accessible digital experiences actually means under the EAA. The Act covers websites, mobile apps, your checkout and payment processes, your customer service channels, and it demands that product information be presented in ways that are perceivable and understandable, regardless of someone's sensory or cognitive ability.
And the unifying framework that defines what perceivable and understandable actually means in hard technical terms is WCAG 2.1 Bulway.
WCAG 2.1 AA.
Yes, that stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
I want to pause on that because perceivable and understandable sounds a bit, like corporate jargon. How does WCAG 2.1 AA actually work in practice? Like, what are we physically fixing on a website?
It comes down to the underlying mechanics of how code interacts with assistive technology. Let's take a Buy Now button.
Okay.
Visually, to you or me, it looks like a bright red button with white text. But if the code behind it just says shape or graphic without an ARA label, which is a specific tag that describes the element, a blind user screen reader won't know it's a button.
It just reads the code.
Exactly. The software will just read out a string of meaningless numbers or say unlabeled graphic. WCAG dictates that every interactive element must be properly labeled in the code.
That makes total sense. It's like my blank price tag analogy from earlier. If you don't have the specific glasses, or in this case, if the code doesn't talk to the screen reader, the information simply doesn't exist for that user.
Exactly. Another massive mechanism is keyboard navigation. Many users with motor disabilities cannot use a mouse. They navigate the web using the tab key on their keyboard to jump from link to link.
Right.
WCAG requires that a user can tab through your entire checkout flow without getting stuck in what we call a keyboard trap, like a pop-up window that you can't close without clicking a microscopic X with a mouse cursor.
Oh, I've seen those.
Yeah, and if you can't tab out of the pop-up, you can't buy the product.
So WCAG 2.1 WLA is essentially the universal blueprint for making sure the digital building has ramps, braille signs, and automatic doors.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that blueprint is incredibly good news. Companies are not dealing with conflicting, contradictory standards across different global borders.
Oh, that's huge.
You do not have to build one version of your website to satisfy U.S. litigation requirements and a completely different custom-built website to satisfy European regulators and a third one for Canada.
So what does this all mean?
It means the exact same standard, WCAG 2.1 LAA, functions the common reference point globally. The exact same technical work a company does to reduce its U.S. domestic litigation exposure is the exact same work that builds its EAA readiness.
Right, so you're hitting two birds with one stone.
Exactly. The jurisdictions multiply, your legal exposure multiplies, but the actual technical workload does not. A unified global compliance strategy is entirely possible.
That is such a relief. Fix it once, fix it right, and you satisfy multiple global watchdogs simultaneously. But honestly, that brings up a really baffling contradiction.
What's that?
Well, if the standard is globally recognized, and it's a known quantity with clear technical fixes, like adding ARIE labels and fixing keyboard traps, and the fines are absolutely catastrophic, why in the world are 85% of companies still dragging their feet?
This brings us to a phenomenon we see all the time in corporate governance. It's the danger of the runway mindset.
The runway mindset. This is the idea that companies are consciously, or maybe unconsciously, treating the time before highly visible public enforcement actions begin as a sort of free pass.
That's the illusion, yes. The law went into effect in June 2025. But major regulatory bodies rarely launch massive headline-grabbing fines on day one of a new law.
Sure, they need time to gear up.
Exactly. They have to build their own internal infrastructure, they gather data, they issue initial quiet warnings. Many companies look at that quiet period and assume they have a massive, indefinite runway before the storm actually hits them.
I have to push back hard on that corporate logic, though. I mean, why would any rational executive assume they have a safe buffer when regulatory bodies almost never announce exactly when they are going to start actively pursuing cases?
They don't.
Right, and making public examples out of companies. It's like playing a game of musical chairs where you don't just lose a seat, you lose €500,000 and you have absolutely no idea who is controlling the music or when it's going to stop.
It's a terrible gamble. And we have historical precedent to show just how badly this mindset fails. Think back to when the GDPR, the big, European data privacy law rolled out.
Oh, right. Everyone thought they had time with GDPR too.
Exactly. For the first year, it was relatively quiet. Companies dragged their feet, assuming the regulators lacked teeth. And then, seemingly overnight, regulators started dropping 50 million euro fines on major tech giants, and everyone else panicked.
Yeah, I remember that panic.
Waiting for the first wave of visible multi-million euro fines to hit the news cycle before taking action means you are fundamentally choosing a reactive strategy over a proactive one. And when we look at patterns of corporate behavior, reactive compliance is almost universally the most expensive path a business can take.
Because when you are reacting to a regulator actively knocking on your door, you aren't just paying for the technical fix anymore, are you?
Not at all.
You are paying premium retainers for emergency legal counsel. You are paying exorbitant rush fees for developers to overhaul your site architecture over, like, a holiday weekend.
Yeah, the costs skyrocket.
Your brand reputation is taking a highly public hit in the European press. And at the end of all that, you are likely still paying the massive fine anyway.
When you dictate your own timeline, you control your costs. You can budget for the audits, schedule the developer time, and roll out updates smoothly. When the regulator dictates the timeline, you pay whatever it takes to survive the audit.
Okay, we've deconstructed the problem, we've looked at the massive legal and financial risks, and we've analyzed the deeply flawed mindset holding companies back. Let's transition to the solution.
Let's do it.
How does a company actually fix this right now? Let's open up the playbook for market eligibility.
The practical starting point is straightforward, but it requires actual organizational commitment.
So the source outlines 3 immediate steps. Number 1, conduct an actual comprehensive audit of your entire digital footprint. We are talking the website, the mobile app, the checkout flows, the customer service channels.
Yep, everything.
And that audit must be strictly benchmarked against the WCK 2.1 AA standard we discussed earlier.
You cannot manage what you haven't measured. You need a baseline truth of where your digital properties are failing. But it's important to understand how you audit. A lot of companies think they can just run a cheap, automated software scanner and be done with it.
Does that not work? Like, aren't there plugins for that?
It only solves part of the puzzle. Automated crawlers are great for catching low-hanging fruit, like finding every image on your site that's missing alt text, or flagging a background color that doesn't have high enough contrast with the text.
Okay.
But software cannot tell you if a checkout flow actually makes logical sense to a human being. A comprehensive audit requires automated tools paired with manual testing, often by professionals who actually use assistive technology daily.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, they are the only ones who can tell you if your keyboard navigation truly works in practice, not just in theory.
Software can check the code, but humans have to check the experience.
Perfectly said.
Okay, step 2. Prioritize based on severity and frequency. You don't have to fix the entire internet overnight. The source specifically recommends starting with your checkout process and your core navigation. Why those 2 areas specifically?
Because they carry the absolute highest legal exposure and the most direct impact on your revenue. If a user cannot navigate your site to find a product, or cannot input their credit card information to give you their money, that is the most critical failure point, both legally and commercially. Fix the money-making plumbing first, then worry about the blog archives later.
Love that. Fix the plumbing. And step 3. Build an ongoing compliance practice, not just a one-time fix. Digital accessibility is not a project you finish, it's a standard you maintain.
Exactly.
Every time you add a new product, redesign a landing page, or update your app, you could be introducing new barriers if your team isn't trained.
And this leads to a vital, often overlooked component of the playbook: documentation. You need to meticulously document your audits, keep a log of your remediation efforts showing what you fixed and when, and you need to maintain an updated, accurate accessibility statement prominently on your site.
Why is the paper trail so critical if the site is already being actively fixed?
Because it demonstrates good faith compliance.
Yeah.
If a European regulator ever scrutinizes your digital presence, or if you face a domestic U.S. lawsuit, being able to show a historical, documented record that you are actively finding issues, logging them, and funding the fixes is your strongest defense.
That makes total sense.
It proves that accessibility is embedded in your operational culture rather than just a frantic reaction to a threat letter. Regulators are far more lenient with a company that is actively trying and documenting their progress than a company that is doing nothing and hiding.
I love that approach. It turns compliance from like an invisible IT task into a tangible, provable asset for the legal team.
Yes.
And that actually ties perfectly into the ultimate conclusion of the report we are drawing from today. We need to completely reframe the corporate narrative around accessibility. It is no longer just about risk avoidance. It is about what the authors call market eligibility.
This raises an important question for any leader listening today. How do you view your company's growth? Do you see regulations like the EAA as annoying bureaucratic hurdles? Or do you understand the global landscape well enough to realize that accessibility is now simply the price of admission?
Yes. Compliance isn't a barrier keeping you from doing business. It is a basic requirement to even step onto the playing field.
Exactly.
If you want to compete in Europe or the UK or frankly anywhere with a modern regulated digital economy, you have to be accessible. By embracing this standard proactively, you effectively turn regulation into a foundational growth opportunity for brands with global ambition.
You really do.
You are future-proofing your revenue streams against sudden regulatory shocks.
While your competitors are crossing their fingers, relying on the runway illusion, and hoping the regulators don't notice their locked digital doors, you are opening yours as wide as possible to every single consumer, entirely unbothered by the shifting legal winds.
That is the absolute best way to look at it. Let's wrap this up and synthesize the key takeaways for you, the listener, so you can take this straight into your next strategy meeting.
Let's hear it.
First, the European Accessibility Act is a past tense reality. It is here right now.
Right.
Second, the geographical net is incredibly wide. If you are selling to EU consumers, regardless of where your corporate office sits, you are in scope.
Yeah.
Third, the fines are massive, up to €500,000 per violation, and they stack per inaccessible service. But finally, the roadmap out of the danger zone is clear, actionable, and globally unified under the WSAG 2.1 AA standard.
The playbook is in your hands. Audit comprehensively using both software and human testing. Prioritize your critical revenue paths, document every step of your progress, and embrace accessibility as your ticket to global market eligibility.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We started today by talking about the absurdity of building a beautiful physical storefront, but forgetting to unlock the door for a fifth of your customers.
Yeah.
We've spent this entire deep dive looking at the severe legal and financial penalties for doing that in the digital world. But think about this. If accessible digital design is now the strict, unavoidable legal baseline just to enter one of the world's largest consumer markets, how long will it be until global consumer expectations shift so drastically that inaccessible design becomes a permanent brand killer, long before a regulator ever even gets involved?
Wow. Yeah, if the baseline of society moves and your brand is the only one left locking people out, the fine won't be your biggest problem. Your overall relevancy in the marketplace will be.
A tough but necessary reality check. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the European Accessibility Act. Keep learning, keep questioning your assumptions, and stay curious.